Welcome to Season 2 of the Face to Face Ministries podcast. I am Melinda Wilson.
And I'm Kathy Little. Thank you so much for joining us as we introduce you to ministries and leaders from around the globe who have said yes to the Isaiah 61 mandate to heal the brokenhearted and set the captives free, helping people to step into who they were always meant to be.
And for more information about us, please visit our website, face2faceministries.org. That's all one word, no spaces, no numbers, and no caps. And please follow us on our social media platforms, face2faceministries.org on Facebook and on Instagram, face2facemin.
Welcome to today's episode. We are so happy you're here. Well, welcome to episode 67 of the Face to Face Ministries podcast.
We are so glad you're here.
Yeah.
67.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so we have a really special guest today. His name is Elijah Lee, and we've very, very recently just met Elijah through our connection with the River, which is we're all part of the River Revival Network. And Elijah actually has a really special addition to this conversation because of his role in traditional counseling and inner healing, and also bringing in the Korean culture and doing some really amazing doctoral studies, or you're doing a thesis or something on that, dissertation. So Elijah, why don't you give us a little bit of an idea of kind of who you are, a little bit of your background, and kind of set the table for who you are to introduce yourself to our guests.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I mean, really good to be with you both. And I am a licensed counselor. I was there in Missouri. I just recently moved to Illinois. But I did go more the traditional counseling route. At the same time, I feel like it was kind of a trick that God played on me, as he often does sometimes, where the program that I went to first was kind of marketed or named as a pastoral counseling program. And back then, I didn't really know what the KCREP accreditation was. And the KCREP accreditation is really the counseling accreditation board for the profession of counseling. So that's the licensed counselors. And so that particular board accredited counseling program, which means that they have a standardization of training for counselors. At that time, this program also offered what was a spiritual formation program. So they first named it as pastoral counseling. When I got into the program, it was spiritual formation. So I had this very unique introduction to what's in the academic research is called integration, the integration of Christianity, theology, and psychology. And that word integration is very much kind of a hot topic in the world of academics with Christianity and psychology, where it's now being reframed a little bit. And I've just recently moved to Illinois, and I'll be teaching at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And what we're starting to call is kind of more of a contextualization or interfacing with faith or with your belief system or Christianity. I was in Missouri for a little bit, Kansas side, getting training in my master's in counseling. And soon after graduating, I opened up a private practice. It's called Hope Healing. And then immediately started my doctoral work. And that's the PhD in counselor education and supervision, which is a terminal degree for counseling, the profession of counseling. Mm-hmm.
How far along are you in that PhD program?
Hopefully almost there.
All right.
I am. Yeah. So I finished all my coursework. So I'm officially what's called a doctoral candidate. So I've officially defended my dissertation proposal. And so now I am kind of have the green light to go ahead and collect data in support of my thesis and to continue to analyze and to come up with some sort of, hopefully some significant results there. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about that? Because we actually received an email about participating in the research that you're doing with those with Korean heritage. And I mentioned I had sent a friend to that, and she participated in that. But I'd love to hear more about your study, your thesis, and what you're finding out about that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. By the way, it's the data collection piece is where I'm at. And, sometimes I guess as academics and researchers, we can get very technical about some language, but in the field of counseling, we're really dealing with people. So, I mean, these are real people, real numbers, people behind these numbers, which is what's important in the field of research. I mean, if you ever get a survey around research, please take the time to do so, because it's really advocating for real change. And for my particular study, what the foundation of it is really kind of this that term attachment to God, that in the literature, in the academic literature, it's become a little bit more robust. We've started out with and you might have others talk about this, is this idea of attachment, and really our formative relationships with our caregivers, creating either a sense of safety where we can explore, or might not. And so, going back from John Bowlby, who started out talking about kind of this phenomenon, researchers have compiled information on information. That's the world of research, and they've come up with this term attachment to God, which is the same idea that we can find God as a secure base for exploration. So I kind of, I laugh sometimes, because I think about the church and kind of like preachers saying, well, we've preached on this for so long. Like, how come it's now coming into research? And that's the world of research. The world of research is sometimes where you're thinking, no, this works. Like, butter is bad for you. And there's, suddenly like 15 years later, you're thinking, oh yeah, there's this kind of research that it is good or bad, And so, that's kind of the world of research, that it's sometimes slow going, because you need empirical support. You need to do the studies over and over and over again. So really, my thesis, or my dissertation, is centering around the second generation Korean American community. And what that means is that really in 1965, with the Civil Rights Act, there was an influx of first generation Koreans. And so, of course, immigrating means that they got citizenship and they are Korean Americans. Now, what happened is that the church, or churches, started to become kind of a sociocultural hub of Korean Americans, meaning that it was a center where the culture was there, of course, but the Christianity became kind of integrated with the culture. And so it's kind of this interesting space where both the Korean culture and Christianity kind of meshes in. And we see that across the states, whether you're in Florida, whether you are in California, or in certain socioeconomic statuses, or different ethnicities. You find that, maybe, Korean Christianity isn't the same thing as Hispanic Christianity, as it is the same as others. So, the crux of my research is really to say, okay, so if there is an attachment to God, a relational reach, and almost kind of to say that's our kingdom culture, right? That's the culture of the kingdom. Can it really, and I'll kind of explain this a little bit. I don't necessarily like the word transcend, but I'm using it. Does it transcend the culture? And what I mean by transcend is more so, does it integrate into the culture? Does it kind of move through it in a way where it's the foundation and the overlay of the culture? So say we have kind of the sense of attachment to God, which on one level, attachment is to kind of say, when I'm with another person, I can be with them, and I can be really kind of focused in and attuned with them without being distracted and kind of moving out because I feel anxious to be with that person. And so if there's a sense of being with another person that is translated through attachment with God, is that a universal truth? I think so. I think it might be. I think it might be something kingdom. I think it might be something that transcends our culture. And so if that's it, I think we want it. I think we want it in Korean American culture. I think we want it in all cultures. It's really tricky when you get into the culture because, there's kind of two ways of thinking about research. One is quantitative, which is kind of the numbers and the statistics, and that's good. The other is qualitative, which is kind of more of a subjective experience of another. And so in a qualitative study, there's a quote that I found that said by a Korean American person, in church, you don't play by God's rules, you play by Korean rules. And so that is very indicative of the culture there, meaning that there's an overlay of Korean kind of values, and it kind of trumps what church's rules are, or maybe even in sense of kind of what Christianity is supposed to give. For example, the idea of honor your parents so that it goes well with you. In the Korean culture, there's something called a hyo, which is filial piety. It's kind of, I owe to my parents because they've given so much. And on one end, it's very good. It's a very good thing. On the other end, um, it can become harmful. And so my study is actually moving towards, how does attachment to God affect what's called, or impact what's called, differentiation of self. And I'll explain that for a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you have any questions but on what I said, but I'll explain the differentiation of self piece in a little bit too. Yeah.
Wow. We're talking to an academic here. This is awesome. And it's really, it's, I think it's valuable to be able to understand like where, your culture is and where your relationship with God is and how they interact and affect each other. So thank you for doing what you're doing. That's pretty amazing. I know my friend popped in and took the survey and was really happy to be part of that. So I'm excited to see how that all pans out and what your research is showing. But basically you're now collecting your empirical data and your qualitative subjective stuff to support what you've already been seeing, right?
So my study is quantitative in nature. So my original design was to really qualitative, being interviewing individuals to find out if something is really true, right? So then maybe you get 7 or 8 people. Quantitative is maybe 200 people taking what you just mentioned, a survey that is supposed to measure some of these constructs. And so, I'm getting some headway at it. And again, kind of the measurement piece, if you might have looked at it through, is the differentiation of self piece is very much the family piece. Are you going to be emotionally reactive in your family, or are you well adjusted and you're actually going to find a sense of individuation? So all of that can be measured. I think that was very fascinating in my doctoral journey. All of that can be measured through instruments. Those are the questions. And so there's a whole science behind that where, I'm not the subject matter expertise, but even when I get into that stuff, it gets, it's kind of complicated. Yeah.
It's interesting. Everything you're talking about, it's very well, and you can correct me because I'm not a neuroscientist, but knowing enough about the brain, it's when you're doing a PhD or studying academics, it's more of a left brain exercise. The analytical research, the data, the collecting, the reading, studying, learning, memorization, writing essays, whatever that is, and yet the content itself is more right brain. So if you're, in other words, you're doing all this research on a subject that is more, I guess, subjective as far as dealing with people's stuff, to put it in my layman's terms, because some of the words you're using, they're big and fancy. And a lot of people are going to be like, I don't even know what he's talking about. I just need help. And so can we kind of, and I think it's fascinating, though, that there's so much research and study into this, and why there are people like you and Dr. Jim Wilder and Dr. Carl Lehman who have, copious amounts of years of study under their belt. And yet they did it for the purpose of helping people. And so let's just kind of, I guess I'm interested, Elijah, in hearing, you're obviously an academic, but you must have a heart for people and not just for academia. And I just want to get a doctoral, I have a PhD at the end of my name. So what motivated you in the beginning even to study, to become an academic in this field of study, in counseling? What is that about?
Yeah. Appreciate the question. Yeah, it does become it can. And I think I scratch my head sometimes, even in the field. And part of picking the field itself is that our boots, hopefully as counselor educators, are on the ground as well. And so I'm in private practice as well. And so I see the sometimes direct correlation. I wouldn't say that as I gotta, I pause in terms of saying that as a researcher, but I see a kind of the impact of the research on the ground, and some of what needs to kind of go vice versa there. But in particular to the study that I'm doing right now, I had a kind of an experience of God reaching out to me in the midst of the mess of my family. And again, I've mentioned some of the dynamics that's there in the research, but that's real stuff. When you talk to Korean Americans, second gen Korean Americans, there is a very much sense of how do I navigate being both in kind of not really Korean, but not really American either. And so, really, kind of when there were several times in my life that I remember this kind of got pieced together, but I had kind of at an early age a very kind of a curious kind of zeal for God. And it wasn't religious. It was actually kind of peculiar in terms of that I would reach out to God in kind of the midst of it, in the midst of kind of my childhood. But at certain points in times, I kind of had this kind of this picture, of what if and I'll say this before, is education is very highly valued in the Korean American culture, in the Korean culture. And so I had this kind of thought of kind of, what if somebody, a Korean American, could hold up a piece of paper, right, an article, and kind of say, Dr. So and so said that this is important. My relationship with God is important, and also there's some things happening in my family that I don't know, that doesn't seem very healthy. You can't really say that in your family system. You can't really say you're wrong, really, to the authority figures in your family there. But if somebody with authority, a pastor, a scholar, somebody says that, you might get some weight behind it, and so that's kind of, for me, the integration between both the faith world. Of course, you mentioned I'm with the River, and so I'm an ordained minister as well as a licensed counselor. That kind of both of those places can be made to kind of go under in submission to serve kind of the community and to give them a voice. And so that's where I think I mentioned to you before that Heidi Baker was a mentor of mine. I went through in 2008 in her mission school, and she says, let my ceiling be your floor. And that to be the kind of the posture of humility is more of kind of in counselor speak, it's kind of to say there's a power differential. And what we do is we use hopefully we're humble. We come to bring that power differential and make it to be a kind of service to our clients, and make it to be a place where they can have voice. And so really that's kind of me wanting to bring voice to this particular community, but also this has cross-cultural implications as well in terms of, again, the differentiation of self piece has a lot of different stuff around it, but it's something that can be kind of the idea being, I can be in a healthy family system, and is there a way to achieve that through attachment with God? And I think there is. That's why I'm studying it, and I see that on the ground, and I see it in the research, and so that's a little bit of how those worlds kind of mesh for me. Yeah.
So you are a practicing counselor in that arena. That is your field, but you also see the benefit of incorporating and blending in heart healing as well, and incorporating those. So how do you see those things working together? Because that's a conversation that we've had, because we do have some people on our ministry team who are licensed therapists, but they also incorporate inner healing into their practice. So what does that look like for you practically? Like, how does that play out in what you do with focusing on heart healing in the midst of a counseling session?
Yeah. So for me, there is, so I would say that the ethical codes of practice of the American Counseling Association, KCRUP, which I mentioned, the Counseling Accreditation Board, they are very much weaving in and through a biblical worldview, and weaving in and through a biblical paradigm. So I think that, before entering into, and this is true of clinicians, whether inner healing or practicing clinicians, is that we, before jumping into interventions, into the how to, we kind of have to have the conceptual framework, which really comes out of us, right? We're the instruments. So, if we're a person that's, and this is part of really any ethical code. I mean, Christian practice, they kind of do no harm, right? we kind of need to start there, I think,
Yeah.
and then to kind of say, okay, so what tools can I use to kind of bring this person towards uh, a connection with God, but also not only that connection with God, but in terms of Christ likeness. So I would say that I would use the form spiritual formation to describe that process. Not so much an inner healing technique or a model or practice, but kind of the process of spiritual formation. So that means for me, it blends in the psychotherapeutic approaches. I practice from a psychodynamic orientation and attachment-based, emotionally focused therapy. Um, and a lot of times I'll get pastors in the room, so we'll sometimes even talk really theologically about some issues. But it's so much that we want. I say this sometimes is. The heart of the matter is the matter of the heart. Actually, Bobby Connor, I don't know if you know him, he says that
Yeah.
sometimes. And I've adopted that. The heart of the matter is the matter of the heart, and really we need to get there. And so the skill sets, all the interventions, those kinds of things are really kind of movements or moves, right? To kind of say how do we get there to see what's going on with the heart. So, yeah, I know that kind of answered your question. Kind of,
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Well, something you've mentioned a couple times, something that's also I'm passionate about, only because once I've learned, when I learned about it and then started getting healing in it, it changed my life, and that's attachment. And
Hmm.
you have attachment pain, you have attachment with God, healthy attachments, unhealthy attachments. And, I don't know if everyone has necessarily heard that term, because I think it did come, was that Dr. Alan Shore? I don't know, or maybe it was someone before him, but originated in the psychology world, I believe. And then it's kind of been introduced into more of the Christian healing, Christian inner healing through Dr. Jim Wilder and Dr. Carl Lehman, maybe others. But can we talk about, let's land on that for a minute, on
Hmm.
attachment. What exactly
Hmm.
is that you're talking about?
Yeah, so hopefully when my dissertation is published into an article, read the short section of historical context. There's a whole historical context on attachment, and so I know Dr. Jim Wilder and I think Dr. Alan Shore, they're taking attachment principles and kind of creating a pathway towards some really practical help in the counseling world, and that's where we're at, which is, I think, really good. But to go backwards is to say that it really came from this guy John Bowlby, and this is going back to kind of well, let's use Freud because everybody knows Freud, and so Freud has some really great, profound kind of impact to the psychology and counseling world, and of course some of it, like the psychosexual stages, we kind of say, hey, that's probably not really accurate of human development, but some of it actually profoundly is still actually some of that. But I think when you talk about Freud and, we know like the whole kind of sexuality stuff, those kind of things, really primally it's about connection, and of course God's good design for sexuality is connection. And so, when we look at attachment, it's really looking at that connection piece. So disrupted attachment means that, there's a sense of disconnection, which there's kind of a progression, and some of the names you might find in the literature are Bowlby and Ainsworth, and there's childhood attachment where you can go to YouTube, and there's this kind of still-faced experiment where you go and see this mom, and she's really vibrant, and she's kind of looking at the baby like mothers do, and then there's a place where they say just don't show any facial expression, and the child gets really agitated. So we can say that we can already see that in babies, that there's a sense of security that's there, and we learn attunement, we learn how to be glad with each other, we learn to be sad with each other, all of that. So that's really the idea of attachment, kind of, hey, you're the person that I can see and I can model, right? And so that becomes a healthy and secure attachment will create, again, a sense of exploration and a sense of kind of, I can do this. For example, sometimes I say, it's like the playground picture. You get the playground picture of the sandbox and kids there, and maybe you have a kid, of your own in the sandbox, and they get sand dumped on them, and they come back to you and they're crying, and it's the job of the parent then to kind of say, hey, what's going on, I'm here with you, what was that like for you? And then when that child has now regulated their emotions, they've gotten back online, then they can go back and kind of say, okay, I'm okay now, I can go on with the world, I can kind of get bumped up around a little bit in the world and be okay. So that's that. And then the opposite of that is true. We've kind of, in the realm of sociology, there's the coined term, and we've seen in the ministry too, a fatherless generation, and we're working with a fatherless generation. So you have no person to go to. You're sad. You have times where you really need somebody there, and you get beat up on the playground of life, and nobody's there. Nobody's there to kind of be sad with you. And nobody's there to say, hey, bud, give it another shot. Or, you are, beautiful, and you're going to be great, those kind of things, So I even have like tears coming to my eyes when I think about this kind of moments, as those are the fostering relationships that we want to do. We want to facilitate as counselors, and even as educators, as whoever we are in life, mentorship, discipleship, pastoring, every one of those, every arena of life, we want to foster these kind of secure bonds with each other, that we can say, you know what, there's a pandemic, but I'm here with you. I'm feeling the same thing you are, and I'm here with you. And, it's messed up. There's no solution right now, but, I am here with you. And of course, in terms of attachment with God, we can kind of bring that to a place where saying, I do know somebody that has a solution, and of course, that's not it. That's not the end all, of our relationship with God. But it's nice to know that He does have a plan, so that's a little bit of a historical context, and then kind of a grounding of kind of what that's like, why attachment is important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously not everybody has perfect attachments growing up, which
Absolutely.
is
Yep.
where the heart healing and all
Mm-hmm.
of the therapy and stuff like that comes in, because of things that we've missed out on. But again, you were talking earlier about the connection with your studies that you're doing for your doctoral thesis about attachment to God.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some ways that you see that we can help people establish that healthy attachment with Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, before I stepped into the clinical world, there was more, I guess, I don't know if I would say more room, because there is room in the clinical world. That's kind of my space of trying to create that. But one of and you might be familiar with, one of the earlier adoptions or the methods were theophostic prayer ministry with Ed Smith. And so that's where Dr. Jim Wilder has taken kind of some of his tenets with Dr. Carl Lehman, and created kind of the Emmanuel prayers, which you guys are familiar with. But, really what it comes down to is creating moments where the person is in a place where they can experience God. And, that sounds very simple and very complex at the same time. How do you facilitate that? And so in certain points in times, for me, it's more kind of it, going to process the trauma narrative. We know that it's in the world of healing from bad things happening to us, that some things remain with us, and that's kind of the realm of trauma. And the idea is that how we make sense of the story is really what's important. And so it's this idea of a narrative. So that's where I see God interplaying with counseling. how do we tell the story? How do we reshape the story? And we know neurobiologically that's it. When we change the story, it changes our long-term memory storage of what those experiences are like. The sadness that was there now is with an experience of somebody being with, maybe hopefully God as protector in that. And then when we go back, our brains just do it. We go back into those memories, that when we are in moments in the present, it goes back to a memory that's positive rather than a triggering memory. And so really it's about telling the narrative and restoring the narrative, and to invite God into reshaping that narrative. Yeah.
Wow, that's good. That's like the money right there. That is so good, so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that I think you described inner healing you just described inner healing. And maybe in a more, I wouldn't even say it clinical or academic way, just in a way that doesn't sound, I think some people shy away from inner healing because I don't want to get emotional and just navel gaze, or it's ooey gooey or whatever kind of terminology. And you put it in a way that's more, this is just for anybody. It's not about being ooey gooey or, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but I have to be all emotional and put my heart out on the floor and weeping and gnashing of teeth and everything. But the reframing of the picture, and I was just listening to a woman speaking yesterday. She also is PhD in trauma, spirit-filled believer, and she basically said the same thing about the whole reframing the trauma, so that when I'm thinking again back to that memory, I no longer am re-traumatized and experience PTSD and the same negative emotions and feelings that I did before. And of course, the Emmanuel approach is all about that too. Of course, it's developed by a psychiatrist, and so he knows all about the brain and how it works, and specifically targeting trauma. I mean, that is something all of us have experienced trauma. I don't think we don't think we can escape this earth without, experiencing some kind of traumatic event or something that we didn't get to experience that became traumatic for us. So having the reframe, and of course, Jesus, in my estimation or belief, is the only one who can do that. So I just love that you are bringing the integration.
Yeah.
And I see you really pulling these two huge pieces together, and then also speaking in a language that is going to be maybe more applicable, more attractive to those that are thinkers and want to analyze the data and want to know, why do I need to do this? So I really think your contribution, Elijah, is so important, because you're coming from that, hey, I've done that. Like you said, you can hold up your degree, and to a lot of people, that's really important. Like, I've done the research, I've done the studies, this works. And we can call it all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, in my opinion, anyway, as not an academic, I do have a couple degrees, but not in theater. So it really doesn't help. But but to say that Jesus wants to heal the brokenhearted, whether through counseling, whether through inner healing, whether through an integration of both. And that's
spiritual formation,
and spiritual
walking
formation.
it out. Yeah.
And that's such an important key too, that, obviously we've talked to most of the life model works people about the ongoing healing that it happens within community. We've got to have healthy attachments, speaking of, and it's not just about sitting in a counselor's office or sitting in an inner healing person's office. It's about the ongoing work of sanctification and, like you're saying, spiritual formation. Right. So I love this conversation. We probably will wrap up, because we could probably talk for hours more, but we don't want it to be a 4-hour podcast.
Of course. Yep.
Yeah. But thank you so much, Elijah, for your contribution and for being willing to be part of this kind of a last minute thing. But we really do appreciate what you are investing your time and attention to right now as an academic and in education, and also in the field of traditional counseling with that spiritual formation piece. So thank you for spending some time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Glad to do so. Yeah. Thank you both.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Face to Face Ministries podcast. And to be sure not to miss any future episodes, please subscribe.
And to help us get the word out, please share this podcast with your friends. Give us a 5-star rating and leave us a brief review. More content is coming your way.
Thank you so much for listening.